There are places in Yellowstone where the radio goes silent, where the thermal vents breathe like living things, and where rangers learn that some disappearances are better left unexplained. I'm about to share 3 stories that were never meant to leave the ranger stations. Stories that were buried in incident reports marked inconclusive. Stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about America's first national park. If you're still here, you're brave. Let's begin. Story 1: The Thermal Basin Transfer. Ranger Michael Torres had worked at Yellowstone for 6 years before his transfer to the Norris Geyser Basin Station in September 2019. He requested the move himself, eager to work in what's known as the hottest and most volatile thermal area in the park. The basin sits directly above the Yellowstone supervolcano's magma chamber, and the ground there literally breathes, shifting temperatures by 40 degrees in minutes. Michael's supervisor, a weathered ranger named Bill Hendricks, gave him one rule on his first day: never investigate steam plumes after dark. Ever. Michael asked why, naturally. Bill just looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and said, because some things mimic the sounds people make when they need help. And if you go looking, you might find what's making those sounds. But that wasn't the part that still keeps me awake. It was Michael's 3rd week at Norris Basin. October had turned the aspens gold, and the nights came earlier, colder. He was doing a final perimeter check at 7:47 p.m. when his radio crackled. Help! Please! I'm hurt! The voice was female, young, desperate. Michael's training kicked in immediately. He grabbed his med kit and flashlight, radioing dispatch. I've got a distress call. Thermal Basin, Northeast Quadrant. Responding now. Dispatch came back confused. Torres, we show no hikers past the boardwalk closure. Repeat, no civilian signatures in that sector. But the voice came again, clearer this time, not through the radio, through the steam itself. Please. My leg. I can't move. Michael ran toward the sound, his flashlight cutting through the sulfuric mist that rose from the superheated pools. The boardwalk ended 100 yards back. He was now on unstable ground where the earth's crust could be as thin as paper. Where are you? He shouted. Here. Over here. The voice was coming from near Dragon's Cauldron, a particularly violent mudpot that bubbled at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's when Michael saw her, a woman, maybe 30 years old, lying just beyond the safety barrier, her leg bent at an impossible angle. She wore a white jacket, covered in mud and steam. Hold on, Michael called out, testing the ground with each step. The crust felt solid. He moved closer. I didn't know it then, but that moment was a warning. The woman looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. Thank God. I thought no one would come. Michael was 10 feet away when his boot broke through the crust. He jerked back just in time, feeling the heat blast against his shin. When he looked down, the ground beneath him was spider webbing with cracks. He looked back up at the woman. She hadn't moved, hadn't even flinched at his near fall. Ma'am, I need you to try to crawl toward me. The ground where I'm standing is unstable. I can't, she whispered, but her lips didn't match the words. The voice came from behind her, from the steam itself. Michael's blood turned to ice. Ma'am, what's your name? She smiled then, and it wasn't a human smile. We've been waiting for someone to come after dark, the voice said, now clearly not coming from her mouth at all. The warm ones always come when they hear crying. Michael backed away slowly, his boots crunching on the fragile crust. The woman's form began to shimmer, like heat distortion on asphalt. And then he saw what was behind her, rising from Dragon's Cauldron itself. Something massive, something that moved like smoke but had weight, presence, intelligence. There's a reason rangers don't talk about this. Michael ran. He didn't look back. didn't stop until he reached the boardwalk, the solid wood under his feet. His radio was screaming with Bill's voice. "Torres, get back to the station now." When Michael made it back, shaking and covered in sulfur burns on his arms from the steam, Bill was waiting with a bottle of whiskey and a file folder. Inside were 17 incident reports, dating back to 1988, all describing the same thing. A woman in white near Dragon's Cauldron, always after dark, always injured, and 7 rangers who went to help her and never came back out. "The ground where you found her," Bill said quietly. "We've mapped it. The crust there is less than 2 inches thick in most places. Below that is a superheated mud chamber at 220 degrees. Anyone who steps out there, they don't die fast." Michael looked at the reports, at the names of rangers he'd never heard of. "What is it?" he asked. Bill shook his head. "We don't know, but it's been here longer than the park. And it's patient." Michael transferred out 3 weeks later. But here's what the official reports won't tell you. 2 months after Michael left, a maintenance crew was doing thermal monitoring near Dragon's Cauldron. They found something in the mud, preserved by the heat and acidity. A ranger's badge from 1992, and on the back, scratched in desperate, shaking letters, "IT learns your voice." Later, I learned what really happened to those 7 rangers. But before we get to that, if you're feeling that creep of unease right now, that tightness in your chest, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Because what comes next gets so much worse. And you'll want to be here when I share the stories they really don't want you to hear. Now, let me tell you about the hiker who found something in the backcountry that wasn't supposed to exist. Story 2. The Fern Lake Incident. Ranger Sarah Chun specialized in wilderness rescue. 15 years of experience, over 200 successful recoveries, and a reputation for staying calm when everyone else panicked. In July 2021, she was called to lead a search for a missing hiker named David Moreno, a 34-year-old software engineer from Denver who'd gone out on the Fern Lake Trail 3 days earlier and never returned. The trail is popular, well-marked, 9 miles round trip. You don't just vanish there. But David did. The search team found his car at the trailhead, his dog still inside, alive but dehydrated. The dog, a German shepherd named Scout, should have been with David. He never hiked without Scout. But when they opened the car door, Scout wouldn't leave. He just sat in the back seat, staring at the tree line, growling. Sarah had never seen a search dog refuse to work. They started the search at first light. 12 rangers, 2 dog teams, and a helicopter with thermal imaging. By day 2, they'd found David's backpack, his water bottle, his phone, all placed carefully on a boulder near Arnica Creek, 2 miles in. Not dropped, not scattered, placed. "This is staged," one of the younger rangers said. Sarah nodded. "But staged by who? And why?" "This next part, I still can't explain." On day 3, Sarah split off from the main search grid to check a hunch. There was an old ranger cabin about a mile off trail, abandoned since the 1970s, used sometimes by backcountry campers even though it was technically off-limits. The forest was wrong there. Too quiet. No birds. No insects. Just the sound of her boots on pine needles and her own breathing. When Sarah reached the cabin, the door was open. Inside, sitting at a rotted wooden table, was David Moreno. He looked up at her with sunken eyes, his face gaunt, his lips cracked. He'd lost maybe 20 pounds in 3 days, which shouldn't be possible. "David!" Sarah's hand went to her radio. "I've got him, coordinates." "Don't," David whispered. His voice was like dead leaves. "Don't call them yet. Please. I need to tell you something first." Sarah's training said to call it in immediately, but something in David's eyes stopped her. "I found something," he said, "out past Turbid Lake." There's a valley that's not on any map. Sarah knew every trail, every valley, every creek in this sector. There's no valley past Turbid Lake, just ridge line and thermal features. David laughed, but it wasn't a sane sound. That's what I thought too, but I saw deer going through what looked like solid rock face. So I followed them. He pulled something from his pocket and placed it on the table. A photograph, not a digital image, an actual Polaroid, the kind that hasn't been made in decades. But that wasn't the part that still keeps me awake. The photo showed a valley, lush, green, beautiful, and in the center was a structure, not a cabin, not a lodge, something older. Stone walls covered in symbols that looked almost Native American but not quite. And in front of the structure stood people. Dozens of them, all facing the camera, all smiling. I took this 2 days ago, David said. I was there for maybe an hour, but when I came out, 3 days had passed. Sarah felt her skin prickle. Where did you get this camera? It was there, in the structure. Along with these, he pulled out more Polaroids, all showing the same valley, the same structure, but different groups of people, different eras, judging by the clothes. Some photos looked like they were from the 1980s, some from the 1950s. One looked like it was from the 1920s. All the people were smiling, all of them facing the camera. All of them looked wrong somehow. Their eyes were just a little too wide. Their smiles just a little too fixed. David, we need to leave now, Sarah said, her training finally overriding her curiosity. I can show you how to get there, David said. The entrance is still open. I can feel it calling me back. We're not going anywhere except to medical. David grabbed her wrist. His hand was ice cold. There were names carved in the stone, he said. Hundreds of names. And Sarah, I found yours. The radio on Sarah's belt crackled. Chan, we've got a situation. Scout just took off into the woods. We can't stop him. A howl split the air. Not a dog's howl. Something deeper, older. Sarah pulled free from David and ran outside. The forest had changed. The light was wrong, slanting through the trees at an angle that made no sense for 3 in the afternoon. And she could hear it now. A low humming, like electricity through power lines, coming from deeper in the woods. When she turned back to the cabin, David was standing in the doorway. It's opening again, he said. Every 73 years. And this time it wants more than just visitors. Sarah's radio died. Her phone went black. And in the distance, through the trees, she saw movement. Figures. Dozens of them. All wearing clothes from different eras. All walking in the same direction. All smiling. If you're still here, you're brave. Because what Sarah did next goes against every rule in the Ranger Handbook. She followed them. The figures moved through the forest like they were underwater, gliding more than walking. Sarah kept her distance, marking trees as she went. Standard search and rescue protocol. After 20 minutes, the figures stopped at what looked like a solid rock face on the side of a ridge. And then they walked through it, like it wasn't there. Sarah approached slowly. The humming was louder now, vibrating in her bones. She put her hand against the rock. Felt like touching static electricity. Like touching water that wasn't wet. Like touching something that existed and didn't exist at the same time. There's a reason rangers don't talk about this. Sarah's hand went through. She pulled back immediately, but she'd seen it. The valley. Exactly like in David's photograph. Green and lush and impossible. And the structure, ancient and covered in those symbols that weren't quite Native American. And all those people standing in front of it, smiling, waiting. She turned and ran. She didn't stop running until she hit the main trail, where the search team found her 2 hours later, incoherent and hypothermic despite the summer heat. David Moreno was never found. The cabin was searched, empty except for a stack of Polaroids that showed nothing but static. Scout, the German shepherd, was found 3 days later, sitting at that rock face, whimpering. He refused to leave. He had to be carried out. Sarah Chen retired 6 months later. She now lives in Florida, as far from mountains as possible. But here's the detail that didn't make it into the official report. When the search team examined the rock face Sarah described, they found something. Carved into the stone, hidden by lichen, was a date. October 17, 2094. 73 years from the last opening. Whatever's in that valley, it's patient, and it's waiting. Now, before I share the final story, the one that made 3 rangers quit on the same day, the one that involves something the Park Service has been monitoring in secret for decades, I want you to do something. Go check out the video I've linked in the description. 12 scary park ranger horror stories that will give you nightmares. If these stories are getting under your skin, that collection will absolutely wreck your sleep schedule. And trust me, after what I'm about to tell you, you'll want more answers. Because this last story is still happening, right now, at this very moment, and they have no idea how to stop it. Story 3, Old Faithful's Secret. Old Faithful erupts approximately every 90 minutes. It's the most famous geyser in the world, photographed millions of times, watched by countless tourists. But there's something about Old Faithful that isn't in the brochures. Between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., when the boardwalks are empty and the visitor center is closed, Old Faithful's eruption pattern changes. The rangers noticed it decades ago, but they were told never to log it, never to investigate it, never to speak about it. In March 2023, 3 rangers decided that silence had gone on long enough. Their names were Marcus Webb, Lisa Tran, and Daniel Okafor. This is what they found. The night shift rangers at Old Faithful had an unofficial protocol. Between 2 and 4 a.m., you stay inside. You don't watch the geyser. You don't go near the boardwalk. You just stay in the visitor center, doors locked, and wait for daylight. When Marcus asked why during his orientation, the senior ranger just said, "Because the eruption between 2 and 4 isn't for us." "What does that mean?" Marcus pressed. "It means some tourists aren't tourists." That should have been enough to make Marcus drop it. But it wasn't. He recruited Lisa and Daniel, both experienced rangers who'd heard the same cryptic warnings. They agreed to do an unauthorized observation on March 17, 2023. They set up in the observation building with thermal cameras, night vision, and audio recording equipment. Old Faithful's last normal eruption was at 1:47 a.m. According to the prediction algorithm, the next eruption should occur at 3:16 a.m. At 2:03 a.m., the geyser erupted again. But it wasn't water. I didn't know it then, but that moment was a warning they should have heeded. The plume that shot into the air was darker than water should be, thicker, and it didn't fall back down in droplets. It fell in shapes. Marcus watched through the thermal camera as the shapes hit the boardwalk and stood up. They were human-shaped, approximately 6 feet tall, but their thermal signature was backwards. Cold where they should be warm, hot where they should be cold. "Are those people?" Lisa whispered. Daniel was checking the night vision footage. "They're solid. They're physical. But they're not showing up on infrared the right way." There were 12 of them. They stood on the boardwalk for a moment, then began walking. Not toward the parking lot. Not toward the visitor center. Toward the forest. "We need to report this," Lisa said, reaching for her radio. But Marcus stopped her. "Report what?" "That we violated protocol to watch something we were specifically told not to watch." "Then what do we do?" "This next part, I still can't explain." Marcus made a decision that would haunt all 3 of them. "We follow them. They left the observation building and trailed the figures at a distance. The night was moonless, cold. The figures moved in perfect synchronization, their footsteps making no sound on the boardwalk. When they reached the forest edge, they didn't stop. They just kept walking, passing through pine trees like the trees weren't there. "They're not solid," Daniel breathed. "They're something else." But then one of the figures stopped, turned, and looked directly at where the three rangers were hiding behind a service building. It had a face, or something that used to be a face. The features were melted, distorted, like a photograph left in the sun too long, and it smiled. Later, I learned what really happened to the rangers who investigated this before Marcus, Lisa, and Daniel. But they didn't know that yet. The figure raised one arm and pointed back toward Old Faithful. The other 11 figures stopped walking. They all turned. They all pointed. And Old Faithful erupted again. At 2:34 a.m., 17 minutes after the last eruption, which should be impossible. But this eruption was different. This one screamed. The sound was human. Dozens of human voices, all screaming in perfect unison as the water shot 200 feet into the air. Marcus, Lisa, and Daniel ran back to the visitor center and locked the doors. They watched through the windows as more figures emerged from the geyser. Not 12 this time. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. They filled the boardwalk, standing shoulder to shoulder, all facing the visitor center, all smiling with those melted faces. What do they want? Lisa was shaking, her voice barely audible. Marcus was checking his phone. No signal. The radios were dead. Even the backup satellite phone showed no connection. Daniel was at the window, his face pale. They're coming closer. The figures had begun to move as one, gliding across the boardwalk toward the visitor center. The temperature inside the building began to drop, breath turning to fog, and then the lights went out. In the darkness, Marcus heard it. Footsteps inside the building. But that wasn't the part that still keeps me awake. It was the voice, his own voice, coming from the darkness. "Marcus," his voice said, "thank you for coming out to watch. It's been so long since anyone stayed to witness the return." Lisa screamed. Her voice was speaking too, from a different corner. "We come from the deep places," her voice said. "We've been coming back since 1872. Every night, building, waiting, learning your shapes." Daniel's voice joined them. "Old Faithful isn't a geyser. It's a door. And every eruption between 2 and 4 is us coming home." The three rangers huddled together in the center of the room as their own voices circled them in the darkness, speaking truths that broke their understanding of reality. At 4:07 a.m., the lights came back on. The figures were gone. The boardwalk was empty. Old Faithful sat dormant and innocent in the pre-dawn light. Marcus, Lisa, and Daniel were found at 6:15 a.m. when the day shift arrived. They were sitting in a circle, completely silent, staring at the center of the room, where they'd carved words into the floor with their fingernails. "They know our faces now. They know our voices. When the door opens wide, they will wear US." All three rangers submitted their resignations that morning. None of them would speak about what happened. The official report called it a shared anxiety episode due to isolation and night shift fatigue. But here's what the Park Service doesn't tell tourists. Old Faithful's eruption schedule is now monitored 24/7 by a special unit that reports directly to Washington. The observation building has been equipped with equipment that isn't listed on any inventory. And between 2 and 4 a.m., armed guards now patrol the boardwalks. Not to protect the tourists, to keep something from leaving. There's a reason rangers don't talk about this. Because in September 2023, 6 months after Marcus, Lisa, and Daniel quit, a night janitor at Old Faithful saw something that made him run screaming to his supervisor. The thermal cameras had captured it at 2:47 a.m. 3 figures emerging from the geyser, walking with purpose toward the visitor center. They had faces this time. Clear faces. Perfect faces. The faces of Marcus Webb, Lisa Tran, and Daniel Okafor. The real Marcus, Lisa, and Daniel were contacted. They were all in their homes, miles away from Yellowstone. But their faces were at Old Faithful. And according to the last update I received, they still are. Every night, between 2 and 4 a.m., walking the boardwalks, smiling at cameras, waiting for the door to open wide enough to let them all through. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person who needs to see what else I've uncovered. Head to the description right now and watch 12 Scary Park Ranger horror stories that will give you nightmares. These 3 stories, they're just the beginning. The incidents I cover in that video will completely change how you think about national parks. Yellowstone is beautiful. It's majestic. It's one of the natural wonders of the world. But it's also ancient. And some things that are old for a reason. The rangers I spoke to for these stories all said the same thing. Respect the wilderness. Follow the rules. And never, ever investigate the things you're told to leave alone. Because in Yellowstone, some doors should stay closed. Some voices should never be answered. And some places know your name before you ever set foot there. Thank you for watching. If these stories made your skin crawl, if they made you question your next hiking trip, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories they don't want you to hear, and drop a comment telling me which story disturbed you the most. I read every single comment, and who knows, your experience might become the next story I investigate. Stay safe out there. And remember, if you're hiking in Yellowstone and you hear someone calling for help after dark, keep walking.